with a bureaucracy. It doesn't say let the best men rule. Just let's get people who have a little bit of tin horn expertise in one area. We'll just pass those damn papers all around. So, Agamemnon violates the sacred and is made to understand that he can't do that, or if he does, the whole Greek army is going to die. So you've got to give back the daughter of the priest whom you've taken to be a concubine. And he gets furious and says, if you're going to take away my girl, I'm going to take away somebody else's. And the girl that I'm going to take away is the person that you like the best, Achilles. So there's again, as if Bush said, I don't like the way you're reacting to me, you American people. I'm going to hurt McCain. I'm going to tell you a story. We've had that happen just recently. There was some guy who angered the present administration, and they leaked that he was a CIA agent. Yeah, we'll get you back. We'll get you back. You take something from us, we'll take something from you. That's what the Iliad's all about. And it says, in point of fact, as Simone Weil says, and we'll get to that too, she says that it stays the same. The government in the Iliad is the same government that we have here today. It's people with a lust for power or a lust for popularity, and they get angry with each other, and God help those who get in the way. and it's the people, when Homer comes to describe the deaths on death on death of the Greek warriors, it's always about the sadness back in Greece for the parents and the wives and the children who will never see them again, because they're caught in a terrible vise of vanity, anger, hatred, and it's the National Guardsmen who pay the price for that. We live in some kind of a thing that's far away from the message the sea gives us, that says it's all right for angry people at the top to make decisions that will take the innocent away from their families and cause them to die in a situation that we have, through stupidity or ignorance or some kind of wounded self-esteem, gotten ourselves into. Anyway, Achilles goes off and gets angry and stays angry until practically the whole Greek army is destroyed. And they're destroyed by a guy by the name of Hector, who's a great, great soldier. And many critics say that Hector is right on the verge of becoming the hero of the Iliad, because he's such a wonderful guy. Imagine that, as if we wrote a great American novel and had a Vietnamese person or an Iraqi become the hero of the novel. That's what happens in the Iliad. That's what happens in the Iliad. And he gives us a seed into why Hector's a good person. So we'll look at the most important passage in the Iliad, or at least the best known passage. 125. You see, once you get into it, once you hear it read, it's not a difficult book to read. It's all very simple stuff. We get terrified by it, and we put it aside and say, I'll go to page 124. We're going to look at the second line on the page on 124. The she there is Hector's wife Andromache. Page 124, the second line. Andromache came up to Hector now, and the nurse with her, and she held to her bosom their baby child, Hector's beloved son. Watch this, beautiful as starlight. Not bad. Whom Hector had named Scamandrius, but everyone else called Astyanax, the lord of the city. And they did this to honor his father, because Hector alone could save Troy now. And Hector looked at his son and smiled in silence. And Andromache stood close to him, shedding tears, clinging to his arm as she spoke these words. Hector, you're possessed. Your courage is going to kill you. You're leaving for war now with no feeling for this small child or for me, the luckless woman who will soon be your widow. It won't be long before the whole Greek army swarms and kills you. And when they do, it will be better for me to sink into the earth. When I lose you, Hector, there will be nothing left, no one to turn to, only pain. Now, the Greeks are a very flawed people. Greek literature has some real problems to it. I'm not going to tell you that the Greeks were the answer to everything. Their economy was built on slave labor, and they tended to think of women as things. Don't educate women would sound perfectly good to a Greek. And it's taken us a long time to get over those two ideas. The American Civil War was really based on a reading of Greek thinkers, or the South sense of slaves, that slavery is okay. There are certain people who are just born to be slaves. And we did terrible things with that idea, and that idea lasted for a long time, and that was a great flaw. And the Greek sense of women has destroyed major parts of our own sense of who we are. So the Greeks had a lot that we shouldn't have paid attention to, and there's more. There's more in terms of all sorts of things, some of which I don't even like to get into. And yet in this passage, we have an extraordinary insight by the poet Homer into what it is to be the wife of a man who loves courage more than family. When I lose you, Hector, there will be nothing left, no one to turn to, only pain. It goes further than that, because this woman is helplessly in love with Hector. And her life until she met him had been a disaster area. Real love is when you meet somebody who answers all of the pain and suffering that your life has been. And that's what Andromache did when she met Hector. My father and mother are dead. Achilles killed my father when he destroyed our city Thebes with its high gates. But had too much respect to spoil his body. He burned it instead with all of his armor on, heaped it up in a great funeral mound. And the spirit women, to be like angels, came down from the mountain, daughters of the storm god, and planted elm trees around it. Imagine if you had buried someone you love and found that some beautiful tree had sent a seed and put a tree up over the grave, as though nature itself were conspiring to honor the person that you had buried. That's what's going on here. Daughters of the storm god planted elm trees around it. I had 7 brothers once in that great house. All 7 died on a single day, cut down by Achilles. He's going out to face Achilles. In one blinding sprint through their shambling cattle and silver sheep. My mother, who was a queen in the forest of Plakos, Achilles took as prisoner with all her possessions, then released her for a fortune in ransom. She died in our house, shot by Artemis's arrows. And then this beautiful passage, which really says something more elegant about women than most of the Iliad says about men. It's like the book of Ruth, wherever you go, I will go. Ruth to Naomi, your God shall be my God. Beautiful, wonderful thing in the Old Testament. Here's Andromache to Hector. Hector, you are my father. you are my mother. You are my brother and my blossoming husband. Show some pity and stay here by the tower. Don't make your child an orphan, your wife a widow. We now go over to page 125, lines 491. Hector answers her and says, I have to go to battle. You don't understand. Women don't understand anything. After that beautiful passage, Hector says, I've got to be on my way. And I know that story has been repeated over and over again in recent weeks as National Guardsmen have left for Iraq. These beautiful young men who have a spirit of generosity and decency and pride. Tom Brokaw says that the last generation was the great generation and we'll never see their likes again. That's not true. I had in class some of the kids who were going over, and you couldn't ask for more beautiful kids. And their sense of making the world a safer place, and they're fighting on behalf of goodness are very, very deep. You just look at the faces when they do that at the end of the news hour on public television when they put up the faces of those who died. Those are good people. Those are good people. Those are faces that say proud things about the way they were raised in the American family. And that's why this other tragedy that's happened over there is so even more. But here we come. So Hector says, I've got to go. So the words, when it says with these words, are down 491 at the bottom of the page. Hector says, I've got to go. Courage calls me. Duty beckons. The honor of our country is more important than the love you have for me. And watch this. Watch this. Resplendent Hector, he's all dressed in his uniform. Resplendent Hector reached for his child, who shrank back screaming into his nurse's bosom, terrified of his father's bronze-encased face and the horsehair plume he saw nodding down from the helmet's crest. And there's that disguise and recognition. The child doesn't understand the armaments of war. The child doesn't understand the terror of battle. The child doesn't understand why fathers have to grow up and don uniforms. I just heard the other day that the soldiers on the Normandy beach each carried 75 pounds of equipment with them. They were on the shore. 75 pounds. And here is Hector with a bronze-encased face and a horsehair plume. And the child says, whatever that represents, I don't understand it. And Homer is very close here to a kind of a pacifism, which says, why can't we let families be in peace? Why do these quarrels among self-centered men have to be so destructive? And he doesn't quite have the fullness of the insight, but he has enough to know, for us to know that Homer had seen something in the family, in the idea of home, which said to him, home is important, and to raise a nation to be a military power might not be the best idea. To strengthen the home might be a more important thing to do. And it's a very simple, he's going to come back and say it again in a great passage called The Shield of Achilles. But here with these words, I've got to go. Resplendent Hector reached for his child, who shrank back screaming into his nurse's bosom, terrified of her father's bronze-encased face and the horsehair plume he saw nodding down from the helmet's crest. This forced a laugh from his father and mother, and Hector, here's the recognition, removed the helmet from his head and set it on the ground, all shimmering with light. And then he kissed his dear son and swung him up gently and said a prayer to Zeus and the other immortals. Zeus and all gods grant that my son become as I am, foremost among Trojans. He just doesn't get it. He just misses the boat. Brave and strong and ruling Iliad with might. And may men say he is far better than his father when he returns from war, bearing bloody spoils, having killed his man. And may his mother rejoice. And there's a great sense there among all of the critics who look at this passage that he came so close to understanding the beauty and the power of the family Homer did. And yet in the society in which he lives, that family has to be second to one's role in society. And in many ways, sometimes we're called to that. Sometimes we're called to think of Martin Luther King. And sometimes the price we have to pay for social progress is an individual giving up his family. But there's a warning in this passage: don't do that too easily. Don't do that too easily. Finally, when you're telling others of the meaning of the sea so that you can die gently, something of the meaning of the sea has to be that that sea has children and reminds us of our own childhood in the war. Can you say for 5 minutes some things about anger management? Or would you?
I won't do 5 minutes. Art wanted me to, because of the beginning passage in the Iliad about rage. For the last 12 years, I taught an anger management program. Actually, we would call it aggression management, because anger is the emotion, the feeling, and it's very human, it's very normal. And what I tried to get people to distinguish was the behavior that flows from anger, the aggression, the violence, the destruction. I dealt with mostly court-ordered people. I taught about 50 a year. Between 30 and 50 would complete my program. Part of the program was devoted to anger, getting people to own anger. You know, how often have we all said growing up, "You really made me anger," or we said stronger language. And it was trying to get people to say, the feeling, the emotion is yours. Obviously, the closer we are to people, the more vulnerable we are when their behavior, their conduct lets us down, etc. And we experience anger. And as Art was saying, you know, that's the time to shoot some buckets, clean the garage, get your hands in bread dough, whatever it is, to calm you down so that later you can approach that person and talk about your feeling and not, again, put greater burden and risk on the relationship by, again, engaging in an aggressive or violent behavior, even if it's sulking or shutting down. So we all need time, a lot of times, to figure out what our best way to approach a situation where we felt anger, we felt hurt. And that's what I spent my time trying to do with people, mostly males who had done domestic violence, child abuse, people who had been in bar fights, that kind of thing, so they were alcohol or other drugs were contributing factors. That's the other thing, you know, people were willing to try to blame the substance, and it was like, no, that just frees up what's already there. It isn't the cause. So the other piece that I did in the anger management was stress management, because one of the things we know is that people who have high levels of stress oftentimes tend to be a little more angry. And so I figured, if I can't get them to buy into what I was teaching them about anger, maybe it would be easier for them to buy into some things around stress management And if we could lower the volume on their stress, correspondingly, they might lower the volume on their anger. And I always had fun with it, the program. There was a lot of homework in it, much more than we get here. In fact, these people who weren't accustomed to anything like that, you know, they would moan and groan because every week they got handouts and they had to read. Every week they had to do what we called an anger report. They had to take one situation where they had felt anger during the previous week and evaluate it, answer questions related to it. And part of that flows from, I think it was Socrates, the unexamined life is a life half lived. St. Augustine said that. And for me it was, you have to get people to reflect on their life, to examine it, and to see and understand how they could have handled the situation better. That was their growth, hopefully, and some of them did make progress. So those were some of the things I played around with, because anger eats a lot of tax dollars up, a lot of court time. It hurts an awful lot of families because, again, children are being abused, spouses are being abused, and then within our society itself, you have road rage, you know, any of those kinds of things going on. The other thing I did in the beginning, the first program, I had a list of 35 words 40 words that were related to anger. And I would hand it out to everybody, and I would say, so circle the words or